Good morning, how's it going? Today I went scavenging in the garage for some inspiration. I looked through the scrap wood and found this almost square piece that I liked. I started imagining a creature of some sort emerging from a body of water. So, with my plan taking shape, I grabbed my aluminium wire and got started on the armature. For this sculpture, I secured the joints with tape. If the wire had to hold more weight, I would instead do this with more wire, wound tightly around to make sure it was secure. But for this one it wasn't necessary. Tinfoil is next. Using this to bulk out the form keeps the weight down and makes it less expensive to make. I squish more foil into a ball for the head, which I can drill a hole into the back of to fit into the wire neck. Once I'm happy with the form and silhouette, I can start with the initial layer of clay. Two lines of clay are added along the chest for the collarbones and blended in. When doing this, I go back and forth between the ball stylus and the silicone blender. I found this is the easiest way to get a smooth, cohesive look. After bulking out the neck a little, I move on to the clothes. The idea is that they're emerging from the water, so I'm trying to make the top look as though it's wet and being weighed down by the water. I'm doing this by adding lines and lines of clay in the direction the cloth would be pulled. One shoulder is further back, so I'm adding lines across the body from the point that they are twisted from, as that would be where the top would be stretched. I add another line of clay to where I want the collar of the shirt to be and blend it in. This line was a wee bit thin and I wanted more weight to it, so I go back over it with a thicker line and adjust the neckline as well. I move on to a smaller ball stylus when the lines of clay are smaller to ensure that I don't squish any of the details. The sleeves are made in much the same way. I curl thicker lines of clay around the arm so the sleeves look like they are bunched up, and then follow the curves of the texture on the body as a guide. I blend this all together, deciding to add the second sleeve off camera as it's just the same thing. The face is the most fun part because it's where you really get to see it come to life. I mark out a general guide with lines, then push in the eye sockets. I add a line of clay with a triangle for the nose, blending as I go. The brow bone area is next, getting slowly bulked out. This is the part I usually underestimate, so it will continue to get more fleshed out as I go. Eyelids are added with wee lines of clay, blended carefully out. This part is quite delicate. It's usually made easier if you bake the eyes first, but I didn't do it for some reason on this one. The cheekbones are next, again blending out with the ball stylus and then a silicone tool. The chin gets more shape with more lumps of clay, and then I move back to the forehead. Again, I switch back to a smaller ball stylus when I move on to the smaller details around the eyes and over the brows. I decide to change the shape of the brow slightly, angling it more downwards. I then add the nostrils and I move on to the ears. I was struggling with the face at this point, but sometimes the fix is as simple as adding the ears on. It just made the face feel more real and look more like it did in my head. The inside of the ear is carved out and pushed around until I'm happy with the detail. I start the mouth by bulking out the space a little bit. I add the bottom lip first with a line of clay, blending it out, and then the top lip in the same way. I mark the inside of the lip line with a sculpting tool and then move on to attaching the head. I use bacon bond, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's liquid clay that cures in the oven just like normal clay, but it's very good at securing unbaked clay to baked clay. I add thick lines of clay all around the neck, building it up and up until I'm happy that it looks alright and the head feels secure. I decided he was looking a little too human, so I added the triangle of clay to his ears to make them look pointy. The hair is next. I knew I wanted it to be curly, but I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it. This is my third attempt at getting this right, but thankfully through the magic of editing, you don't have to watch me struggle. I started at the parting and worked outwards from that midpoint. I rolled out lines of clay and curled a few of the ends to make that curl shape. I then added them to the head in a kind of interlocking way until the head was covered in one layer of hair. Once I got to the bottom of the head, I realised that it would have been much easier to start at the bottom and layer the hair upwards so it laid how you'd expect. I used this metal spoon-like tool because I found that it blends hair easier and better than the silicone. The eyebrows are two thin lines of clay, blended in and then textured with a pointed metal clay tool. I also used this tool all over the hair to give it the same texture as the brows. The tail's next. I spent a good few hours making this and I was really pleased with the scale texture I managed to get all over the surface. It was a choice I made after I had already made the body of the sculpture, but once I'd finished the tail I realised it didn't really fit and it made the whole piece look unbalanced. Ultimately, I decided I didn't like it for this sculpture, but now I have a perfectly good tail in the cupboard I could use for a different project. Once baked and completely cooled down, I used the baking bond again to attach the clay to the wooden panel. I hadn't put clay directly onto wood before, so I wasn't sure if it would work. The idea was that there would be lines of clay encircling the figure to look like ripples in water. I first had to fill the gap between the figure and the wood, and then started adding the thin lines. I found this process quite enjoyable because it was kind of like a puzzle. I had to take into account both the body and the arms, as they would both cause the water to move. I've always found painting quite difficult, as I was never really taught much about it. I start by blocking out the base colours. The base gets a greeny blue. I then come in over the ridges with the even more greeny blue to highlight the ripples. I work my way towards brighter blues and end with an off-white highlight on the highest points of each of the ripples. The shirt is based in white, tinged with a little of the blue from the base colour to make it more cohesive. The skin starts off with a grey base coat. I then take the same grey colour down onto the top. I fill in between the ridges, as when I looked at reference photos of wet clothing, the material went almost transparent where it was close to the skin. I was trying to get that same effect. I then added some red to the grey skin colour for the darkest areas of the face. I took this down to the neck as well, using it to accentuate the forms. The hair is based in a reddy brown. Again, I mixed some of the red from before with the darker brown to keep the colour palette cohesive. The eyebrows then get the same colour too. The eyes are based in an off-white, and then I paint the irises and pupils. I'm using UV resin to make the base shine like water. I cured it with a UV torch and then used Mod Podge up the shirt to make that shine too. And with that, we're on to the results. Thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. I'd very much appreciate it. Also, feel free to leave a comment, tell me what you think. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have or consider any suggestions for future videos. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks again, and I hope you have a nice day.